Now, this is part of what you call a bangle or a wrist bracelet, which was found in a place called the Denisova Cave, which we'll come on to shortly, in 2008, and it came from layer 11. Now, layer 11 dates to approximately between 40 and about 70,000 years ago. And recently, it's actually officially come out that this is 60 to 70,000 years old. That's what they now believe. And the importance about this is that, firstly, there's evidence of high-speed drilling actually within the width of it. It's immensely sophisticated, the style of finish. It's a high-status item. You know, it's not obviously for the riffraff or anything. And it was probably worn by an elite woman. And the most important thing is that we weren't around in Siberia at this time. So it has to have been made by one of our predecessors. And since all the evidence of the so-called Denisovans has come out from the same layer, the archaeologists are accepting that this was made by Denisovans, and that changes everything. Now, and the reason why it changes everything is because the next time that this type of technology comes out again is at the beginning of the Neolithic period, around 8000 BC. This bangle was found at a place called Ashiklihoyak, which I've visited in southern central Turkey, and there was an obsidian wrist bracelet found there, which you can see here, that dates to that time. And this was seen as incredibly sophisticated in its own right when it was found, you know, that we had this technology as far back as then. Well, now we know that that technology goes back at least to 60, 70,000 years and doesn't even belong to us as Homo sapiens. It comes from the Denisovans. So, where was it found? This place called the Denisova Cave. It's in Siberia. I'll show you a map in a second. In southern Siberia. It has 22 levels of occupation, dating obviously from recent to around 300,000 years ago. By the way, the 22 levels are not on top of each other. They relate to two different areas that have been divided up into 22 levels. Layer 11 is the Denisovan layer. That's where most of the funky stuff has been found. The location of it is essentially on the border, the Russian border, it's actually in Russia, between Russia, Kazakhstan, China and Mongolia. It's almost on the point of coming together of those four different countries. And it's a very interesting area, but we'll come on to that. Now, a number of other things have been found in the layer 11 that are all now attributed to the Denisovans, including this beautiful needle that is at least 40,000 years old, arguably the oldest needle in the world. And what this tells us, almost certainly, is that the Denisovans wore tailored clothing. In other words, they were making their own clothes. So they not only had sophisticated jewellery, but they had tailored clothing as well. DNA evidence has been discovered in the cave, plus actual remains now, of a type of horse that existed 50,000 years ago, and this was found again in layer 11. And this particular story makes it clear. It says, an early attempt of equine domestication cannot be ruled out. The Denisovans rode horses. And if you consider that it isn't accepted that people rode horses until the Bronze Age, this is really, really important. The type of horse is a now extinct form called the ovudov, however that's pronounced, which was more closely related to the zebra than it was to modern horses. So, you know, that hung around in that area and at least until 24 to 26,000 years ago. They found evidence of it in another cave in the Sayan Mountains to the north of the area of the Denisova Cave, which, by the way, is the Altai Mountains, okay, the Altai. Now, A lot has been written and a lot has been broadcast already on the Denisovans. The Nat Geo did a whole documentary about it and also a feature in their magazine on it. And they created this picture which showed modern humans coming into contact with Denisovans for the first time. So we're at the back, just arriving there, and the guys in the front are the Denisovans. Now, they don't know what the Denisovans look like, or certainly the artists for Nat Geo didn't anyway, so that's why they've got our back to us, and I'll show you the reason why in a minute. But obviously we look much more familiar, turning up, and it's this curious meeting between the two, and how did they get on? Did one stab the other or whatever? Did they shake hands? We don't know. Although I don't think that's quite necessarily the way it went down. But, the fact of the matter is we arrived in this area around 40 to 45,000 years ago. Although there were earlier humans that had reached Australia by around 60 to 65,000, they are not thought to have taken this route through southern Siberia, because the earliest evidence that we've got of anatomical remains of humans, as in humankind, is from about 45,000 years ago. And it's just on the north side of the Altai, so in the same proximity. The Denisovans were around from about 800 to 40,000 years ago. There doesn't seem to be any real evidence yet, although some people have predicted we will find it, that they lasted beyond around 40,000 years ago, and that their last stronghold was the area of the Denisova Cave, the Altai Mountains, and southern Siberia, let's assume, in general. But as we'll see from the DNA evidence that has come out, they were clearly all over the place, certainly as far as East Asia is concerned and in the American continent. So what do we know about the Denisovans themselves? What's actually been found? Well, to date, I know it sounds meagre, but we can make an awful lot from it, is that there's only been 4 pieces of fossil remains of the Denisovans found and confirmed. And most of the work that's been done on this is the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig in Germany. Dr. Svante Pääbo being the main guy involved with all the DNA work on the actual human remains. So we've actually got 3 different teeth, 2 seemingly from adults, 1 from a child, a teenager, and a piece of a little finger, a pinky as they call it. That's it. That's all we've got. But the most important thing, and by the way, they've all been found in the Denisova Cave, because that's where they've been looking for it. That's not the fact that they haven't found it elsewhere, it's just that tests have not been done yet. And the important thing about the Denisova Cave is because it's cold there and because of the type of soil, that human remains have been preserved, fossilised in a manner which allows the DNA extraction. That's both nuclear DNA and obviously mitochondrial DNA, which is basically the bacteria, the DNA of our bacteria that's within the body, that's passed on from mother to child. We have not got anything else. We have not got a skull. We have not got any other bones. Again, that's not to say that they have not been found, but that we've got to work with what we have so far. Now, the important thing about all 4 of the pieces of anatomical evidence that we have so far is that every single one of them show that the Denisovans were of large size. And this is brought out, for instance, in one of the tooth here, which is actually referred to in the Nat Geo TV documentary as a giant tooth. And Bence Viola, one of the paleoanthropologists working on this, basically said that when they first discovered one of these molars, that it was so large that they thought that it belonged to a cave bear. And all of this is so significant because all of this tells us that the Denisovans were incredibly large in size, both in girth and also probably in height as well. So who exactly were the Denisovans? How do they fit into this? Because they're not Homo sapiens, they're not Neanderthals, the DNA tells us this. What we know is that they're completely unique. and that until something like 2008, we had no idea that they even existed. Well, the evidence comes from the family tree of the hominin species that obviously includes ourselves, and you've got it here. But I'll break this down as easily as I possibly can. The Denisovans here on the right-hand side, Homo denisova, or various other names which have been suggested. They haven't actually come up with a proper name that's going to be absolutely fixed in the history books yet. And the common ancestor behind all of us seems to be a type of human called Homo heidelbergensis, who Hugh mentioned earlier on. Now, they existed at least from around 1 million years ago to around 800,000 years ago, and arguably they remained and existed a long time after that, maybe even to 400 to 300,000 years ago. But what it's believed, and this is what the paleoanthropologists now put out, is that it's that the Denisovans branched off from Homo heidelbergensis probably around 800,000 years ago. And then another branch of Homo heidelbergensis continued on, and from those came both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens that split off probably around 250,000 years ago. So in other words, what all this suggests is that the common ancestor is Homo heidelbergensis. Others dispute this and say, well, what about Homo erectus? How does that fit into the picture? But I don't want to go into that today. But I think that they are right with the Homo heidelbergensis for the reasons which I will show you in a second. And that's the fact that the discovery of the very first evidence for the existence of Homo heidelbergensis came from a place called Mauer, just outside of Heidelberg in 1907. And it was the discovery inside this quarry pit of a jaw, which you can see here up on the screen. This is actually a model of it, which dates to around 600,000 years ago and is massive. I mean, it is arguably one of the largest skulls of a hominin that's actually ever been discovered, and that it was realised that it was unique. It was seen to be linked obviously with Neanderthals. It was felt that the Neanderthals were like a later version of the Homo heidelbergensis, and that they were more archaic even than the Neanderthals. But the thing is that the Neanderthals really are something completely separate to the Denisovans or the Homo heidelbergensis, in the sense that they look completely different. I mean, the Neanderthals were very robust, but they were very tiny. They were probably only about 5 feet in height. They had hunched, as far as we know, shoulders. Their bones were extremely thick, and they were well adapted for extremely cold weather, which obviously there would have been a lot of in the time of the different ice